Welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Romans chapter 3, and as I said, we're going to take a little time in this chapter, particularly because it's going to lay out for us in detail what our salvation is. But first, it is also going to tell us why we need salvation. So leading up to that, why do we need to be saved? And it's a valid question. And a lot of people are confused and don't understand the significance of why we say, and also from a religious perspective, why you can never earn your salvation by being religious, just by going to church, just by doing good deeds, living holy. Why that will never, ever, ever work. You will never be good enough. And there's a very specific reason why you will never be good enough to go to heaven. But let's jump to it and see why. All right, so verse 3. Let's start with verse 1 again. So what advantage does the Jew have, or what is the benefit of circumcision? He says considerably in every way. So we kind of dealt with why the Jews are the chosen people. Well, why that's significant. Now stay tuned, because when we get to chapters 9, 10, and 11, Paul is going to deal with the current status of the nation of Israel. All right. So he said, verse 2 again, considerably in every way. First, they were entrusted with the spoken words of God. So, so the very first thing he says is, why are the Jews, what's the advantage of the Jews? What is the advantage of circumcision? Because that was the nation that God gave his word. That was the nation that Jesus came through, okay? Verse 3, what then? If some did not believe, will their unbelief cancel God's faithfulness? Absolutely not. Now, um, pay attention to the word some, and then again in chapters 9, 10, and 11, Paul is going to he's going to revisit this and deal with the issue of the nation of Israel. Where is the nation of Israel in this plan of God for the salvation of humanity? And that's important. I did say there are some Christian believers that believe that the Christian church replaced Israel, that they are the new Israel. That's a false teaching. And so Paul is going to deal with that in detail. But notice he said, what if some, not all, what if some did not believe? And Paul, again, he's going to deal with that, because he's going to dispel that by saying, he's going to deal with that because he's going to say, I'm a Jew and I'm a believer. So what if some did not believe? Will their unbelief cancel God's faithfulness? Absolutely not. He said God must be true even if everyone is a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and triumph when you judge. Okay, so Paul's going to excuse me, deal with some hypothetical questions, or he's going to anticipate some questions to the statement here. Verse 5, but if our unrighteousness highlights God's righteousness, what are we to say? I use a human argument. Is God unrighteous to inflict wrath? In other words, if God is using our unrighteousness to judge us, is he wrong for doing that? Now, I'm going to broaden this by saying because other scriptures deal with it. There are other scriptures that deal with it. And the idea is that no, because God is God. Now, that's the very first thing. God is God. So then his answer here is that Verse 6, absolutely not. How will God judge the world? He says, but if by my lie God's truth is amplified to his glory, why am I also still judged as a sinner? Because you're a sinner, okay. And then he says, and why not say, just as some people slanderously claim we say, let us do what is evil so that good may come, their condemnation is deserved. Now these are kind of questions people may ask. In fact, if you listen to YouTube, there are a series of short videos. Like, for example, and I'm going to paraphrase this, where one atheist, and this is usually who this is coming from, to try to, I guess, disparage the kingdom, but she makes this video to the effect of saying, if God created sin, God killed his son, and then because of the sin he created in you, so that he can take away the sin that, and again, that's not what she says, but you can see that's kind of some of the argument right there. And it's kind of, as you can see, Paul is kind of dealing with that. And really the whole point is here that the argument that God is using our sin. Well, first you start off with that one, God is just and holy. And then secondly, what exactly is our sin? In other words, did God create our sin so that God can get glory from our sin? The answer is no. God didn't create Adam for Adam to fail so that, excuse me, so that he can then get glory. That's kind of an absurd argument, because if you go back, God told Adam what not to do, and then Adam did it. And what this whole argument doesn't deal with is, why do people disobey God? If the consequences for disobedience, so let's go to our kind of court system. If the consequences for our disobedience is, let's say, for example, jail. You have a law, you go to jail. You go to jail. Is the law wrong? Is the consequences of the law wrong? Or how about the as we would say, the accountability for you doing wrong? So when he says right here, is God unrighteousness to inflict wrath, right, by my lie, by me lying? So they try to shift the position that, well, God is using my lie to get glory. Well, let's say if he is, you didn't have to lie. God never made you lie. And that's kind of this. God never made you sin. So we go back to Adam again. God never made Adam sin. God told Adam, don't eat of the tree. Now you may say, well, why did God tell Adam not to eat of the tree? Because he's God. But that's not where the focus is at. Adam literally had, if you go back to the garden, Adam literally had every other tree in the entire world. The entire world. Every other tree that he could have enjoyed. God said, don't eat of this tree in the center of the garden. And he fixated on that tree. Eve fixated on that tree. They didn't have to. They could have said, okay, well. And of course, this is a hindsight for sure, but he could have, like I say, he had literally every other tree. So the question becomes, did God tell Adam, did God put the restriction on Adam so that God can get glory? Well, no. In the sense, what glory did God get from Adam sinning? What glory did he get from that? All right. Now, verse 9, he says, what then, are we any better who is the we? Because he's talking about the hypothetical of those who are asking the question. Now he brings it back. Are we any better? So let's kind of come back to everybody. He says, not at all, for we have previously charged that both Jews and Gentiles are all under sin. Now remember this statement here. All are under sin. This is our starting point for salvation. We are all under sin. Okay? We are all in. This is the starting point. So then it goes on and says, there is, as it is written, verse 10, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. All alike have become useless. There is no one who does what is good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They deceive with their tongues. Viper venom is under their lips. Their mouth is full of cursing and blessing. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and wretchedness are in their path. In the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now, this set of verses, here, from verse 10 down to 18, is a string of verses that Paul put together from like the Psalms, let's see here, mostly Ecclesiastics, we have mostly the Psalms, let's see, there might be one in Isaiah, but mostly the Psalms. He just strings them together, these different verses. Okay, what you look at here is, this is how God looks at you. This is how God views man in terms of the righteousness. This is how God views. This is when. So if you try to measure your goodness, your good deeds, this is what God looks at. I'm sorry, God sees everyone. All are under sin. Okay, all are under sin. Now, verse 19, he says, now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are subject to the law, so that every mouth may be shut and the whole world may become subject to God's judgment. So this is the starting point of salvation. Everyone, every mouth becomes subject to God's judgment. So I kind of mentioned this probably, I think, in the last session, but one of the most damning things that has happened to even, if say, Christianity is Christianity. That you start off with the purity of the church in the book of Acts. And then at some point, where the contamination comes in is around the 3rd century, when the Emperor Constantine reportedly became a Christian. Up until that time, you had the preaching of the gospel, and then you would have these severe bouts of persecution. And then some severe bouts. There was some brutality involved in this persecution. But Christianity flourished during this persecution. And probably that's probably one of the purest times, because, if you became a Christian during that time, the certainty of experiencing some form of persecution, probably up to death, was great. It was great, okay? So in the 3rd century, when Constantine became I mean, not became it. When the Emperor Constantine, he became a Christian, overnight he changed Christianity. He changed, how he changed it was because that he officially made the Christian faith the religion of the empire. And literally overnight, everybody became a Christian. Now, the good thing about that was you literally could have been in jail. You literally could have been getting ready to be fed to the lions. And then that order came from the emperor, boom, everybody a Christian. So that while that was a good thing, then all of a sudden, but the problem is that by saying that everybody was a Christian, whether you were actually saved or not, you were deemed a Christian. So it's sort of like, even I can remember in my lifetime, I don't hear it too much these days. But I can remember if you ask a person, and I'm going to go back now, in the 80s like that and back. If you ask the person, "Are you a Christian?" and they would probably say, "What do you mean I'm a Christian? I'm an American," and they would equate the two. Well, in the Roman days, it literally was true, but the problem is that there was no real conversion. Fast forward to the emergence of the Roman Catholic Church, and then for the next 1,000 years, or 1,500 years, the Catholic Church ruled. It was Christianity. We still haven't gotten over the damage that the Catholic Church inflicted on Christianity. The corruption, the utter corruption from the Catholic Church. And it's hard for us to even get past that. We still haven't gotten over that. We still haven't gotten over that. And so, excuse me. So, 1400s, 1500s, then you kind of had the break, the Protestant break, but still they brought a lot of baggage over from the Catholic Church. But we're still contaminated by the religion. And so when he says right here that we know that whatever the law said, to speak to those who are subject to the law, and then that every mouth may be shut, and the whole world may become subject to God's judgment. The reason why that's hard to understand for a lot of believers and people is because they've been conditioned, brainwashed that religion is the way to go. So, for example, what is one of the number one thing that people think they need to do to be right? I need to start going to church. I need to start going to church. That is the corrective plan of my life. They think that's going to fly with God. I need to go to church. I need to start doing good. That's a contamination, again, that we receive from the Catholic Church. So every mouth may be shut, he says, and the whole world may become guilty before God. Now, I'm going to read this next statement, and I'm going to handle it in the next study. Verse 20 says, "For no one will be justified in his sight by the works of the law." I'm going to unpack that, because that speaks to religion. No one would be justified in his sight, now God's sight, by the works of the law. So if you think just by going to church, we're gonna see how that fits. But if you think just by going to church that you're going to be justified, if you think just by going to church, I'm going to be justified in God's sight, you're sadly mistaken. He's telling you not. And then there's the reason why you cannot be made right in God's sight by just doing good deeds. I'm going to go to church, and I'm going to go to church, and then I am going to be right by just going to church. No. And a lot of people think that. People are like, well, I go to church every Sunday. Right? I go to church every Sunday, and they think by going to church every Sunday that they have fulfilled their Christian duties. And they're sadly mistaken. But we'll pick this up next time. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I'll see you in the next study.